Talk, 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 talk. Art of the zodiac signs. Talk, 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 talk.
Sometimes I was calling myself Queen of Hearts Healing Arts, and it could revert to that. But yes,
it just came out and I questioned myself. But yeah, I recently had a consultation with you. We recently did a chat on IG Live, and I'm like obsessed with everything you do. So I'm going to attempt an introduction. You are a trained practitioner in classical Chinese medicine. You are also a medical astrologer. You're a horary astrologer. I mean, you have like a list of just like titles, but you've been studying, if I'm health and the human body pretty much your whole life. Did I get that part right?
Yeah, I've been obsessed since I was a kid. Yeah.
Yeah. So title wise, am I getting this right? What am I missing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Chinese medicine and astrology. I've done postgrad studies in nutrition, and I've done like other studies in naturopathy, so like natural
Okay.
medicine. Yeah, that's pretty much covers it.
And I'm going to switch this. Look at me real quick. Can I switch this? There we go. Perfect. And I love your Queen of Hearts in the background. You got that perfectly centered.
Yay.
Actually, before we oh, you put your coat back on. I just noticed this.
Yeah, I want to be warm.
I just want to point out to everyone like how exciting the world is, because I'm reporting from summer and you are in Australia reporting from winter.
Isn't it? And we're in different, like what is it? I'm in the future as well because of the
You're
time
in the
zone.
future. I'm in, what day is it? It's Wednesday here. What day is it for you?
It's Thursday. Yeah, Thursday morning.
I just love that so much. I just want to hold space for that weird fact momentarily. But getting back to you, this is a really good way to bring it back together because you're from Australia.
Yes,
right?
that's
So
right.
you were living in the country where you were born. And let's go back there. Tell me, where did this whole like calling to health come from?
Wow. Well, it came from growing up in a challenging household where my mother was struggling, with poverty and addiction and things like that. I grew up in a kind of, how we call them, housing commission. I guess you guys call them projects or something like that.
Okay.
I grew up in a challenging area. And yeah, as my mum kind of grew up with me, I guess, she kind of became a story of transformation to me. But it was hard. And I guess as I grew up, I was kind of in a way like her mentor or her guide, because she would, like, as I learned more about health, and she ended up kind of saying, well, I'll follow what you do, but you've got to have a good reason, So at one point we became vegetarian, and she said, okay, I trust you, like, but you've got to devise a diet that actually helps us, So that was kind of, the impetus came from that health not being much of a priority early in life. And then by the time mum quit all the things was probably about 12 years old. And then, and then I started doing karate. And I think that was when I really, that opportunity opened up my life. And then mum came on board, and she was actually, at one point when I started teaching, she was my student. She started doing karate with me.
So you said you were 12 when your mother started to this sort of make the transformation.
Yeah.
Does that mean like when you were under the age of 12, you were like already thinking about health and diet and nutrition?
Yeah, I was looking after, like, I mean, I guess especially because we were, I was just looking after my mum the best I could, and she was, she was also quite a witty, like, intelligent woman. So she was, to some degree, looking after herself. But yeah, I was thinking about health, and I was looking at our lifestyle, and, because she was a big stoner, she used to just eat like a lot. We always had like apple pies and desserts and stuff in the house. And I was never complaining, I would get sent to school with some things, but I started to kind of ask her questions. And yeah, I think she started to respond just by thinking about it and then being open to input. Like, it was interesting because my mum really responds well to kind of teamwork, or she responded well to teamwork. She's got moon in Libra. She's very she liked to be kind of a partner, like a partnership of like, okay, what are we doing now? All right, let's get on board. Yeah. So I started doing it with her, and then it just sort of took over. And with the karate,
Yeah.
I needed to have extra energy. I needed to be really healthy and fit. So
Yeah.
that's why I started to investigate more.
How did you find karate? Yeah.
Oh my God, it was the best. Yeah, I think for me, I'd come from that early life, which was really, it was quite isolating and challenging. And um, I was very optimistic as a child, though, even though things were really hard. I was always kind of like making light of it. And I think as I got to do karate, though, I realized I was a bit shy, and karate got me out of my shell a bit. And yeah, I just realized that the world is still full of like shit people. And I actually, my first karate teacher was a really shit person. And he actually ended up like, so he was always giving me a really hard time. And I was a skinny young thing. Like I was like, like lanky. And I was obsessed with karate because as soon as I found it, it was like this. I liked the fact that if you kept trying, you could get different belts. Like, because I'm a Capricorn sun, so I like the challenge of like, if you just keep going, you're going to get a new belt and you can get better at this. But this guy, he was a real low life, and I just had a feeling about him. And I remember I never gave in. Like he would, we'd do sparring, and he was about 100 kilos, and I was probably about, I don't know, 45 or something, and he would just like lay into me. And I remember I was about 14 by this stage. I remember looking at him and saying, you know what, Sensei Steve, like no matter what you do to me, I'm never going to stop coming to karate because I love karate, and nothing you can do is going to stop me from coming. Right.
Yeah.
And he just kind of said nothing. He was just kind of a bit shocked. And it wasn't long after that, it was maybe about 6 months later, that I kind of got to get, like I was in senior training and everything. And the main sensei actually said, Danielle, you're taking over that dojo. Like you're taking over. I want you to teach that class as the youngest teacher in the country because, and I was like, wow, what happened to Steve? And he got found out to be a pedophile.
Oh, God.
Yeah. But it was the perfect revenge because he freaking hated me. And so when the big sensei was like, give this paperwork to Danielle, she's taking over. Danielle, who? Like, who? And he was just like, what? And it was full on. My mum used to have to come and sit next to me and like do the paperwork because I was too young. But I really loved that opportunity. And it was a real like FU to that horrible sensei. But yeah, he got locked up, thank goodness. But what a horrible person. What a yucky human.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
I feel like I'm gonna bookmark that. That's a whole conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I won't detour. I do want to ask a question before because I want to get to the meat of this conversation, which is your practice. But were you an only child?
Sort of.
Okay.
So I do have two older siblings on my mum's side, but they were like nearly 20 years older than me. So they were pretty much out of the picture. So it was just mum and I pretty much. We were a unit, like and everyone else, like my mum's family were overseas.
Okay.
And my dad's family, I didn't know my dad because he was struggling with mental illness. So my mum kind of asked him to leave before I was born. So it was very insular and difficult growing up with her. But it was also beautiful because mum and I were very, very close. So when we would sit down and we would do the charts together, even amid like, the freaking police or whatever was coming to the house or, all the shit that went with it, like we got to connect over the astrology. So that was really, really good.
So I'm just checking my Wi-Fi. I apologize. Okay, this is a really good tie-in. You've mentioned before you started studying astrology with your mother. So maybe we can like start to get this one thread. Tell me about the beginning of your astrological studies.
Yeah, so it was with mum. She used to have this. It was like a wheel, and you would plot where each of the planets was on this wheel, and you'd use like an ephemeris, and you'd kind of go, okay, yeah, Venus is in this sign, and it would give you like the angular relationships or like the aspectual relationships between planets. And so we just started to kind of converse about it and pick everyone we knew's charts, and like we would just draw them up and just chat for hours about it. So it was a good in. It was like, you know, a lot of the stuff was also kind of very modern. So it was like Liz Green and Linda Goodman stuff. Mum had all those books, you know, and it was, yeah.
So this is like, so we're starting to get the threads now. We're getting like from a very young age, this sort of interest in health and nutrition from a very practical reasons, right? Reality. And then we get the sort of karate enters, right? And then we get the thread of astrology. The thread of astrology. And it's one of the first things you said to me last time we chatted was that when you were at high school, you said you were such, by that point, like, I don't know, you said you like described yourself as very like, just like, I want to say, you didn't use the word zen, but I feel like that's like what's coming to me. So can you like elaborate on that? Like you in high school?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of Raj yoga, which is kind of, it's open-eyed meditation. So
Okay.
I thought I was getting into a regular yoga class when I was about 13 or 14. And we were just sitting there on mats, just kind of looking at these mandalas and just sort of looking into them. But it was really good. It's very relaxing. So yeah, I was doing that for a while. And then, I did that for a few years. And I think that really just set me up it was perfect timing after what had happened in the earlier years. And I think with the astrology from the earlier years, it helped me to make sense of why life was so hard. And like, it helped me to frame my life to understand that I wouldn't have the same life as my mum, because I was a little bit paranoid that, okay, shit, like, is this what's destined for me? Like, am I going to be struggling my whole life? And of course, that some of that stuff is something to work with throughout our lives. You know, we do inherit some of this from our parents, but also the astrology really showed me the differences between us, and the parts of me that were unique that I could lean into.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because you mentioned you came from like it wasn't just a difficult household, but it was a difficult community. So like, what was it like as a young person who's like really self-driven, doing all of this work to better yourself, right, from like a super young age? Like, this feels like stuff I think people stumble upon their 20s and 30s, and you're just like innately like sort of running towards it. Like, was it a challenge, like when you went to school and maybe other people weren't on the same page? Was there like a dissonance there?
Oh yeah, I think I was always a little bit weird to everyone. Like, mum and I were both a bit weird, and I think mum was very open to all kinds of things. Like, she taught me numerology and palmistry, and her mother was also like quite magical. And our great grandmother was incredibly, like, she was, we called her Green Nanny, but she's like a Welsh. Like, she would predict things. Like, she would see the future, and she predicted everything. So she was like a herbalist and a so it's kind of in the lineage. But I think being at school, I didn't really care that much about it. I didn't care what they thought that much. I think that they were curious as well, because as much as people might have joked about Danielle wanting to know my birthday or whatever, it was like, but why do you want to know? Like, they kind of still had this bit of curiosity. Like, they'll tease me and then they'd be like, so what does it say? You know, like, I want to know, like, what does it actually mean? So yeah, I don't know. It was probably worse in high school, because I think kids are really trying to find themselves, and they're struggling a lot with hormones and all that in high school. And I didn't particularly feel bothered by it because I was doing all that meditation, but I noticed how everyone was really unsettled, and everyone was, I think because the karate also was just like, it gave me something to really like focus in on. And I was just training so much. It was really discharging a lot of nervous energy and a lot of chaotic energy. You know, I really do well with those types of pursuits, like hard physical training.
Yeah. This is I'll sort of share a little to get, like, open up a question here, but something I really resonate with is I also grew up, I had two parents, but they were both just, you know, struggled with alcoholism, and just, it was like domestic violence was sort of, anyways, it was a very tumultuous upbringing. But I feel the one thing I feel very lucky about is I feel like I always had, I don't know where it came from, like this sort of internal sense of like strength to like ward off dangerous adults. Like, I don't know, from a very young like age, it was just, I feel like the one thing I'm blessed with was just this like somehow this ability just to like be able to like spot trouble, like very good instincts. Like, clearly it feels like you also had that. Have you, is that something you've really meditated on since and like thought about?
I wonder, I mean, I think on some level I also like early in life, like there was quite a bit of like abuse and things, and mum wasn't aware of what was happening. And I was I think I was in like this liminal space. It was
Mhm.
like I couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't real anymore. And
Yeah.
I remember looking back at some of the earlier solar return charts in my life, like probably from around 4 to 6 years old.
Yeah.
And I see the themes there because it was you know, these people kind of coming into my room when I was like asleep, and I couldn't make it out if they were strangers that were in my mind or they real people. And then at one point I remember thinking, oh, I've got crocodile. I had a crocodile under my bed. That was what I told
Yeah.
my mum. I was like, there's a crocodile, but it wasn't a freaking crocodile. It was a freaking person, you know, coming into my bedroom and like stuffing around with me when I was little. So it's dark stuff. But I mean, I don't know. I guess as I grew up, I definitely got definitely more protective of everyone. I think I
Yeah.
struggle sometimes to be protective of myself. I can be very protective of everyone else. I'm very protective of everyone else. But I think as I've grown up, I do have more of a radar now of like, okay, you're not trustworthy. And perhaps it did grow to like the radar was probably built quite young because of all that shit that happened. So yeah.
Like, I want to say I'm sorry. I mean, I am sorry. Like, thank you for sharing. Do you think that maybe this is sort of, we can go on to sort of move to the sort of the studies in university, but do you think maybe something you said is you had a hard time maybe standing up for yourself or protecting yourself? Is that the word you used? Do you
Yeah.
think that maybe this like obsession with like karate and maybe health is almost a way to sort of, it started with the body as a way to really get to be grounded in yourself as something secure?
I think so. I think learning how to say no, learning how to fight, like learning how to like learning that it's okay to have what I want, you know, like I don't have to like I mean I do have Mars in Libra, so sometimes I can't understand why other people would do anything against like, you know, being harmonious. Like I just wouldn't understand. I couldn't understand like how people would hurt other people, like yeah, anything like everything in regards to just disharmony or cruelty. I never understood it. Like it's been so foreign to me. So yeah, it's sort of, I think karate helped me to really ground down and to
Mhm.
become strong and to develop mental discipline.
When you, I could spend literally, just want a side note, like I want to go so slow and hear your entire history, but I will try to like get to the, as I said earlier, the meat. But when you went to college, university, did you
Mm.
think, were you keeping up with your karate? Did you know what you were going to study? What was that transition like?
I initially thought I was going to do social work. That was
Okay.
what I had applied to get into, and I got into that. And then after like a year or so of just policy and all this shit, I was like, this is just not my jam. Like, this is, I do like helping people. I've always wanted to work with people and help people. But yeah, I just thought, nah, it has to be health. And so from that point, that was when I started doing the naturopathy, and it just felt a lot more aligned. Yeah. And then I switched again into the Chinese medicine because again, the naturopathy was great, but it did feel for me, for my interest, it felt a little bit like jack of all trades. Like you do have a little bit of everything, but do you
Yeah.
really like, I really thought you don't know the body until you're sticking needles in it.
Can you
You
give me
know,
a one sentence or a few, just a very brief description of a naturopathy? Why do I feel like I can't pronounce this?
it's hard to say. It's a bit like horror. They're both hard to say. Naturopathy, yeah. Listen,
Naturopathy.
naturopathy is
Yeah.
fantastic. It's sort of it's like a Western natural medicine title, which kind of suggests a person who does a blend of things. So they could be usually they do some type of herbal medicine.
Okay.
They do things like bark flower remedies. They might do nutritional stuff. They'll have a little bit of training in counselling. So it's kind of like a Western natural practitioner, so it's a modern day cold pepper or something.
Oh, okay. And
You
so
could
you
call
were
it
you
that.
were yeah. And I love this. You don't really know the human body unless you're sticking needles into it. What was your introduction to acupuncture? Like, how did this?
Well, it's funny because I'm actually terrified of needles. I have to lay down if I have a blood test. Like, I'm one of those people. And I did actually, when I was in my early 20s, I worked as a needle exchange worker at a dual diagnosis like drug clinic. So I've been surrounded by needles, but I bloody hate needles. So anyway, yeah, I was I was treating I was getting treated by an acupuncturist at the university where I was doing naturopathy, and I was so impressed by the speed of everything. So I had I had amenorrhea, or it wasn't classically like diagnosed as amenorrhea, but periods disappeared for no good reason. I wasn't competitively training karate or anything either, so I couldn't quite make out why. And then after 2 sessions, like literally after the session, it was back, like straight back. And I thought it made sense. The logic of it made sense. So the concept is, blood needs to flow. And if there's a couple of things that could lead to amenorrhea. There's multiple syndromes or patterns in Chinese medicine, but the basic ones are deficiency of blood. So say you don't have enough blood, which could be like, say you've got anemia or iron deficiency, which I was a vegetarian, so that's part of the problem. And the second thing was that the blood is not flowing right. So I was actually working in a bar, and it had really full-on air conditioning. And so I actually think that the air conditioning was actually stagnating the blood in the lower abdomen, in the gynecological zone, right? And that blood was stuck. So we had what we call like cold. Cold becomes a pathogen in Chinese medicine when it obstructs the flow of blood and qi. And so they just used a hot therapy. They used the needles, but they used moxa, which is like a mugwort herb on the ends of the needles.
Yeah.
And just directed that heat straight into those channels to break up the coldness. And then the blood was able to flow freely.
Wow. And you said that was one session?
I think it was after the second session that worked. Yeah.
Wow. And so and that was enough to like change majors.
It's wild. I just thought to myself, wow, this is amazing. Like, and I noticed that I was getting a little bit sort of, I don't know, naturopathy wasn't kind of holding my interest enough. Like, it was really interesting, and it was good to know a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But I'd already been studying that when I was younger a bit. I knew a bit about bark flowers. I knew a bit about, Western herbs and a bit about nutrition. I wasn't getting that real feeling of like, wow, I can dedicate the rest of my life to this. Like, I want to. And when I met Chinese medicine, I actually started reading this book, which is called The Web That Has No Weaver. Wow. And it's by a guy called Ted Kapchuk, something like that. And it's a great book all about the basic ethos of Chinese medicine and how it's built on opposites that interact and relate to one another. So it talks about yin and yang and hot and cold and interior and exterior, and like all these polarities that Chinese medicine kind of works to reconcile, in our health. So yeah, that book was like my gateway drug to Chinese medicine.
And will you repeat the name of that book for me?
Yeah, The Web That Has No Weaver.
The Web That Has No Weaver. And if I don't remember that, I will message you after to get the notes, the show notes.
Sure.
Is acupuncture, will you explain this for people? Like, what is acupuncture, and is acupuncture one part of Chinese medicine? We're going to start like getting deeper in the layers here.
Sure. Yeah, acupuncture is the insertion of fine needles into acupuncture points that exist generally along meridians, which are sort of invisible lines of energy, or and the meridians generally tie into organs, but there's a lot of additional meridians which can be they're not always physical. So it gets a little bit kind of muddy, and that's part of the Chinese medicine of it. The clarity is the yang, and the less clarity or the more muddiness and mystery is the yin. So we can't know everything.
Oh, wait. You're okay. You're breaking up for a little. I think you're okay now.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So the acupuncture is about inserting needles into these acupuncture points.
Okay.
And the key part of it is intention.
Okay.
So there's a saying that says, when you insert it, it's like you're like grasping like the tiger, like you've got so much focus on the end of that needle and what you're actually intending to do with that that's how much focus you're putting into it. So you're giving a direction to the body, and there's different needling techniques depending on what it is you're trying to do. So if you're trying to tonify or build up the person, then you'll use a different technique. If you're trying to remove excess or reduce a point, we'll use a different technique. And then there's a lot of other techniques as well, depending on what you're doing, like bloodletting and all kinds of weird and wonderful things that work very well.
So I guess that's my other question, is that so Chinese medicine, you specifically studied classical Chinese medicine.
I studied TCM at university. Okay. So this is what most people study. So this TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, is in a way it's what most people around the world study, because it's the like Mao Zedong era simplification of the classic stuff. So in a way it's a shame, because it's been dumbed down, it's been simplified to be less spiritual, to be less esoteric, because the communist revolution was trying to make it all very biomedical and mechanical. So but this classical stuff I'm doing now is definitely going back to the roots of it. And this is a classical style. So so the guy that is the descendant of this classical style is called Jeffrey Yuan, and he is the 88th descendant of this a jade purity lineage, it's called. And it's like a Taoist form of classical acupuncture, as well as he doesn't just do acupuncture, he does diet, he does herbs, he does qigong. It's like a full thing. But to really get this knowledge is a lifetime practice. Like you don't just study a year and it's there. It's a lifetime of commitment to this. So I love that. It's like the karate, just have to keep kind of moving and learning and climbing toward more knowledge.
Yeah. So you mentioned, right, communist revolution, it affected obviously Chinese medicine. So we had the sort of, as you said, that sort of dumbing down of it. But there's like this lineage that sort of remained. Like I'm curious, and maybe this is a side story you may not know or want to go into, but I'm curious, like, did that guy like leave the country?
Yeah.
Like, how did he
I'm pretty sure his father, now this, I know anyone who's listening to this who's really familiar with the backstory of this might correct me, but I'm pretty sure it was I think it was about 20 years before the revolution. His father, and I think they were practicing this like on a mountain, on a holy mountain in China. He actually got wind of it. Like he got a download of what was about to happen, and he said, let's get out of here and go to America.
Oh, wow.
And so they managed to preserve it and take that knowledge. And Jeffrey's in America. Jeffrey Yuan's in America. Or Jeffrey Yuan is how you say it. Yeah. So terrible with the Australian accent. But it's an incredible system. And there's a lot of people who've studied with Jeffrey and one lady's called Anne Cecil Sturman. She's very, very knowledgeable, and she spent like a very long time studying with him. There's a lot of other people too, but Anne's written a really great book, like an advanced acupuncture book, which is known as the Red Book by acupuncturists. So it's a great reference book. But yeah, I mean, this is a different method, because in university you'll learn the 12 primary channels. You'll learn the ren and the do, so like the channel that runs up the front and the one that runs down the back. And then you'll get a very quick snippet of the 8 extraordinary channels, which are very, very like magical. But yeah, you don't really get much. And then when you do this classical stuff, you end up learning like a whole range. They're called the complementary channels. So you end up learning about the sinew channels, the low channels, the 8 extraordinary channels, and my memory. I feel like there's another one. My brain just broke. Yeah, and so you've got all these. What else is there? Is that? I just feel like my brain may have broke, so I might have to do
I mean, your brain is holding so much information. So there's okay.
8 extraordinary channels. Oh, the divergent channels. Yeah, so the divergent channels are the one I forgot, and it's interesting. They're the ones that can bank pathogens in the joints, and yeah, they're really interesting. So we've got these different additional channels which have all these different usages. So if you're treating an emotional condition, you might actually bleed one of the low points to help release that that emotion from the blood, which is what carries emotion. But if you're dealing with something like a latent pathogen, you might actually do a divergent treatment. So that would help with either banking that pathogen in the body or helping to clear it out if the person's got a lot of resources in them to do that.
I love I'm hoping someone who's listening to this like has a background and understands, because so much of this, well, I've had a consultation from you. I get like how it works in practical, but when you start talking about channels, my brain just like, it's hard to hold on to, which is to say, to be fair, you've spent like years and years, and this isn't like a 2-year degree. This is like an 8-year degree, right? This is a long time studying this stuff.
Yeah, like the TCM was 4 years full time or 5 years full time, and then this stuff is just a lifetime of work. I'm just studying this. I'm always doing seminars, and I'm very lucky because my cousin's actually very very much an expert at this, and she's running a series of seminars. So it's bizarre, but I'm going to be attending all of those in the next year. So yeah, I'm really pumped. I just love it. I think Aquarius rising, I just love knowledge.
That's just like, can I just like you told me that story. We don't need to get into it, but it's just fascinating just to put out there that you have a cousin that you didn't know growing up, and it turns out you both ended up studying Chinese medicine, like just right. Did I get that correct?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. On my dad's side. So I didn't know the dad's side, and then after I finally found them, I found out my cousin is also an acupuncturist.
Wow. And okay, that's still mind blowing. Okay, last big question here, just to sort of situate ourselves. But acupuncture, again, part of Chinese medicine. As a Chinese medical practitioner, are there things that you do that don't involve acupuncture?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And some people are afraid of needles, like me.
Yeah.
No, I still get acupuncture, but yes, absolutely. So there's all kinds of things that we do. So we do things like cupping, which is, placing those suction cups, or like the fire cupping, where we make a vacuum and then put it onto certain parts of the body to actually, generate blood flow or clear out pathogens or all different reasons. So cupping's one method I use. I do things like moxibustion, which we spoke about on the end of the needles, but you can do it in lots of different ways. I'm actually doing an exciting moxa workshop next weekend, which I'm really excited. I think it's next weekend. No, the weekend after that. I'm super excited about that. So yeah, I'm a big nerd, but moxa is this incredible herb which gets into the channels, and it, like I said, it breaks up cold. It helps to build up the body and the vitality, and it's like it can be like taking a tonic herb.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a great thing. And then what else? I mean, I do some massage, but I sort of feel a little bit reluctant when people are like, do you do massage? I thought, well, I haven't studied all this time to just give you a massage. Like I sort of want to conserve my energy, you know, so I will do a little bit of massage. Gua sha is another technique. It's a tool. It's like that, like, you know,
Like
the
the
things.
facial stone. That's what I think of, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We
Yeah.
use it on the back, or we can use it on, you know, around the liver, or depending on what we're doing. But it's a good idea to clear heat, toxicity, generate blood flow, help with any pain. And yeah, it's excellent.
It's fascinating how a lot of those techniques have just sort of made their way into like the wellness massage world, right? Like, I don't know.
Mm.
I feel like having had, and we'll go into this later, having had a consultation with you, which is really like sincerely like game changing. I don't know how much I would want to just let anyone cut me. Like, you know, like you go to like massage therapists and they're like, oh, we'll do this, like there was some like, and I'm like, I don't know what you know you're doing.
Yeah, you want to know because, you know, you can actually, there's some parts that you would generally, there's some things you probably wouldn't cup, you know, like say the kidneys, like the back of the kidneys, you know, you might not cup the kidneys. Some practitioners would say the kidneys tend towards being deficient. So if you're cupping them, especially if you're cupping them with a lot of pressure, you can be depleting the body. So it's not like it's not like a one size fits all. You've got to really structure the treatment to the client.
Yeah. And you're doing more. I feel like in massage, they're just like cupping like something to like get away muscle tension, but I feel like you could just massage that. I don't know. This is not my
Cupping is a
field.
great thing. The good thing with cupping, which I think is better than massage, is like if someone's got a lot of tension and it's very much about contraction, and if you're putting a lot more pressure and you're actually contracting inwards, you're pushing inwards on that. My theory is that it doesn't make sense because you're adding pressure to pressure. I think the idea of cupping is actually you're going to add a heat therapy because it's with a fire, so the heat actually opens the pores and relaxes the muscles and helps that muscle detach or move away and get greater like access to blood flow. Like you can increase blood flow through massage as well, but it's more of a compressive, whereas cupping is going to do the opposite. It's literally sort of freeing and opening and releasing that.
But for you, like if you were seeing someone holistically, that might be like one tool you use. Again, like
Yes.
if you saw the attention, you'd sort of address the whole thing, which maybe this is a good like diving point. So you spent years studying this. When did you start bringing medical astrology into your practice? And maybe like let's introduce that, and then we can like start to do then the like where they come together, because it's still like both of these things, these areas of study, like you could devote your entire life to, and the fact that you have studied both and integrate them so well, like, is amazing to me.
I think like I started to consider medical astrology
Yeah.
maybe 4 to 6 years ago. It's not that long ago. It's
Okay.
when I started to delve deeper into traditional astrology and I started to look a lot more at solar returns and looking at some of the old sort of books like, you know, Abu Mashar and some of these books that would talk about solar returns and talk about health. And I started to think, oh, that's interesting. And I would look at solar return charts for people that I was treating and be like,
Okay.
see that this is a difficult year. And that was where the kind of beginning of it started. I was like, okay, working with solar return charts is going to give us a lot more specific detail about what this person's going through in this year than looking at a natal chart. If they're presenting with something different that they didn't have when, you know, like when they were born or whatever. So the natal is going to give us all a lot of that constitutional data, and, you know, transits to the natal are going to obviously activate things. But when we look deeper at these solar returns, that's really when I started to think, okay, yeah, I need to do more with this medical stuff. Yeah, and then I just dived in. So yeah, it's very good. It's very interesting. It's very complex.
Do you find that, because obviously I'm sure Chinese medicine has its own ways of understanding a person's constitution, I want to say composition, but constitution, do you
Yes.
find that, and then when you draw a natal chart, do you find that those like two methods tend to meet up pretty well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you can look at things like the constitution in, but in Chinese medicine by feeling the pulse, asking people questions about their life, what kind of illnesses they've had, perhaps what kind of illnesses their parents have had, what sort of, and you can feel the body. Like we do a lot of palpation, so we might feel channels or, and we can see if it feels empty, like you might feel a certain channel and it actually feels like there's not a lot of chi or blood, like you can feel deficiency. As opposed to some people, it might feel very hot and excessive, which is more akin to like an excess condition or stagnation. So you can see that in the chart. You can see, for example, like for me, I've got a very phlegmatic constitution.
Okay.
And I also am, predisposed towards cold dampness. So because the phlegmatic humor is cold and damp, it is fitting that my sixth house ruler is the moon in Scorpio. So this is talking about what sort of things could break. What is the kind of thermal nature of the potential pathogen, and it's cold and wet. So yeah, and because the moon is there, I haven't got sick a lot, but I have had a couple of serious incidents of food poisoning. Like I was over in Pakistan traveling, really wild trip, and I ended up getting like dysentery. I was ill, super ill, but it was a gastrointestinal thing. And in that solar return year, I had the moon applying to Saturn in the sixth house. And it was just a perfect storm. And that was activated as a Time Lord and blah, blah, blah. So you can it's just multiple things that sort of, it's almost like it's the opposite of winning a lottery, but like, this goes off, this bell goes off, that bell goes off, and that's like, oh, perfect storm. What are we going to look at? What are we going to see in real life?
So it seems that in a lot of ways, you use the astrology to double up in some ways of like understanding the constitution, but also, I mean, I'll maybe share a little bit of my experience with you for people.
Please.
So maybe that'll be a good example. So, and this comes to something too. I think I had very little experience with Chinese medicine, but it almost seems like it overlaps with Ayurveda. And this is something that people may be more familiar with in the sense of like diet, exercise choices, right? Becomes very personal based on one's constitution, right? So I'm someone who spent a lot of time thinking about what I eat, right? I consider myself a fairly healthy person, right? Like plant-based. I exercise a lot, drink water, don't do any, right? Like I'm pretty like, you would look at me and okay, like there's on paper, a healthy lifestyle, but I was having some issues and I came to you and you looked at my personal constitution, right? So like, and this, by the way, was a remote consultation, obviously, because we are in opposite parts of the world.
Yes.
And so you looked at my natal chart and then you drew the solar return for the year. And it was wild because you could tell me, right, like that I was like holding fluids and where, right, before I even told you, which was just like wild. So you were already like seeing these things. And it's like, and again, I'm someone who's, what I thought was really beautiful about this is I'm someone who's pretty in touch with my body, right? And so to be able to see someone to like, who could verify the like warning bells, right? Because I think that's what they are. It's like being able to go, oh wait, this isn't a huge disaster, but we see something starting to come up here. How can we address it? And the suggestions, right? And it's been a weekend already. Like honestly, like I've taken the things you've given me and I can feel a difference, right? And so there were subtle suggestions of like eating warmer foods, like bone broth, like certain types of exercise that I should sort of increase versus ones that might not be good for my body. And so it was just this really beautiful thing because you were using the sort of diet protocol and understanding of my constitution, but there was also sort of a lot of it was focused on, again, this is what we're dealing with this year. But then I also noticed you pulled up the solar return of like the next year just to glance. So it's like seeing the sort of evolution of one's health. Like, we're fixing these things now because they might come in up later. So let's address this.
Yes.
I hope I described, like, that's
Nailed
how you
that.
worked with me. And that was like so profound.
You've said that so well. And it's sort of not about just looking at one solar return. It's about looking at the story, the evolution of illness and health, and, getting these kind of foreshadowing opportunities to be like, okay, yeah, well, the sixth house, the ruler of the illness is actually in the first house this year. So that means, that you need to work on that. And the thing was, there can be kind of apparent conflicts, so your sixth house ruler is usually your ascendant ruler. So it's like, so we can't just go and strengthen that constitution, because effectively in this solar return year, we'll actually be boosting up the pathogen or the illness or the sensitive area. So how do we work with it? So it's sort of like saying, well, it depends what's popping up. If it's a new thing, and there's additional heat in the body and dryness, then that sun could be bringing some of that, and it's like we need to work with that. So yeah, it's definitely very specific. And I think being able to kind of see the evolution and to say, okay, well, yeah, the liver is potentially implicated in the next couple of years. So treat that now. We were looking at Jupiter and the liver and trying to understand like what you could do to sort of support that, because in a couple of years' time, Jupiter becomes the ruler of some of these illness houses as well.
Yeah.
And so things like breath work and stuff for the lungs too. And yeah,
I love that. And it was interesting. A lot of the things that you were telling me to do were things I was already sort of kind of like on my radar, like my intuition was hitting on, which was really beautiful and exciting. When did you start putting this all together, right? Like when you were first seeing client, like do you remember when the astrology came in, and how did that change your personal life in relationship to your health?
Yeah, I've been like working on a system of doing this for like, a good few years. But I have to say that I've read a number of different books, and some things I don't necessarily resonate with or agree with in terms of like the significations, and like it's tricky. I definitely like to use the traditional rulers and things like that. I find if you start to change them, it can affect the clarity of what you're doing. So I was playing around. I was like, okay, I'll use the solar return, or I might look at transits for this person, or look at what the Time Lord is. But it wasn't until I studied with Lee Lehman and Will Morris. Those two teachers have been amazing to get a much more focused perspective, and especially Will, because Will's also a Chinese medicine practitioner as well. They both contributed different things, but there's only so much you can get to on your own, and I think once you've studied, then you can delve further into Culpeper or into some of these old like medical astrology texts. But having a gateway like those guys, I think it's really helped me, because the thing with Chinese medicine, trying to overlay Chinese medicine over the top of charts is it's actually possible. And Will Morris has got a whole system that he teaches all about that. So, from him, I learned about an example is we've got like the yellow path acupuncture, which is kind of like about the 24-hour clock. So you've got different organs for each period. So they're kind of so the chi is passing through those organs each hour of the day. And so theoretically, if you say we have a meetup to look at your health, and you've got a bunch of planets in the 10th house, that part of the chart in this particular system is connected to the heart. Right? So then we would look at the planet and say, okay, well, Jupiter is actually the wood element. And so because the 10th house talks about what the treatment is likely to be, then I might say, okay, well, if you were here getting acupuncture, maybe I would treat the heart point on like the wood point on the heart meridian, for example, as a treatment strategy. Or because the Jupiter connects with the liver, I might treat the liver and the heart somehow, perhaps, and see if there's heat in there. See what and also see what sign that Jupiter is in, and that would give us more information about, is it hot, cold, wet, or dry, this treatment.
When you said a lot of planets, do you mean the the natal chart, or are you talking about the chart of the moment?
Yeah, so I use when I do a session, I also usually do a consultation chart.
Okay.
And so that those charts can be absolutely fantastic to see what's happening right now, which is obviously going to be the moment of power, the
Yeah.
moment of when someone comes in the door, what is happening right now, what do we treat? And the best advice I got from Will was actually, you might have a number of charts. You could have a solar return, you could have a decumberature chart, you could have a consultation chart, you could have the natal chart. But the chart you use is going to be the chart that the symbolism speaks most strongly to represent what is going on with that person.
Wow. To clarify, a decumberature chart is the moment one falls ill, and the consultation chart is the moment someone comes to you, right? So then we're starting to get like the horary. Say that
Yes.
3 times fast. The
Yeah.
horary overlay with all of what you do.
Yes. So the decumberature is usually it can be any moment that is in strongly indicative in this problem. So usually it's like when you are so ill that you can't carry on doing what you're doing. So to decumb means like to kind of retire and not be able to get back up again. But and a good idea of it, another possible decumberature could be like, when you receive a diagnosis or like a doctor's appointment, or like even if you call me and we have a chat about a new thing, that time could be taken down as a decumberature.
Okay. I love that. I never knew this. A decumberature, to decumb is to what you said, like fall down.
To pretty much just be like, I'm out. Can't get up. When you get to that level of like, you might be pushing and then you get to that stage. And it can even be taken from things like, the time an email's received, or, obviously once you check that chart for radicality, which is about that's to see, well, does this symbolism match what's actually going on with this person? Because there's no point just taking the symbolism and running with it. It has to actually fit what's going on.
I totally unrelated and like really astro nerd question here for a moment. I don't know if I've actually I know I've never seen your chart. Where's your Mercury?
Oh, my Mercury is really debilitated, actually. I have Mercury in Capricorn, retrograde, combust in the 12th house.
I don't know. It's doing something. That's
It's funny. I think Valens actually, he said something that Mercury actually in the 12th can be quite good at esoteric matters.
I mean, it's speaking like it. Like whatever your Mercury is doing, it's doing it well. It that way.
You can see its ruler. Like, I think that really helps a lot. I think Lee actually talks about that as a condition that improves matters in her medical astrology book, so that Mercury can see Saturn. And Saturn is able to at least help manage the topics of that Mercury. So
I just want to point out that your Mercury is nowhere near as debilitated as my Mercury and Pisces combust in the 8th. Take that one.
Oh, I still feel like you're a clever cookie. I just think that these planets, when they're in their challenging places, they just bring something different. They just bring this. I mean, I guess I sit away in the middle of, not in the middle of nowhere, but I live in a pretty, relatively remote place, sitting on my own and, studying a lot and doing a lot of astrology. So it's probably fitting.
See, it's totally descriptive. And what do? You literally just help people uncover things. Like, it's like literally Mercury in the house of hidden things, and you just like investigate and try to figure out like what's going on with people's health, and like that's totally checks out. But a dear friend of mine, an astrologer who you may know, Julia Mijas, who's like brilliant. She does these really fun like videos that I'm just like are like I can only describe as MTV News for astrology. We chat a lot, and we've had, I think her father was a scientist. I feel like we've maybe a doctor, but a scientist for sure. Anyway, we've had this conversation that like the best doctors, this is something she said, like are the ones who really like there's a sense of intuition there. right? Like the best doctors are the ones who just kind of like know. They're like, I have just a feeling, right, that there's something beyond. And do you feel that way with your work?
I think I heard her say this on one of your interviews, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I have got the moon ruling my 6th house in the 10th house, which is indicative of my work being about working with sick people, right? And it's conjunct with Pluto in Scorpio. So it makes sense that I'm like trying to pierce through and go deep into what's really happening for people in a career way, in a way that's wanting to really make a difference. And I think also she said Jupiter in good form, and that's my saving grace, is that I have Jupiter in the 11th house in Sagittarius. So I think that helps to keep put a bit of sunshine in amongst all of that Scorpio, because there's a bunch of Scorpio.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Our Jupiters see each other. I love that.
Yay.
I mean, you know that you've seen my chart, but no, but like it's interesting what you're talking about. The referencing Will Morris, who I believe a friend of mine actually studied with. I'm like want to like listen to his lectures now too. But this idea that you pull a few different charts, right? The decumbrature chart, the consultation chart, and the I don't know what other chart, but you said that like wherever the symbolism speaks loudest, right? It feels like there's a lot in your work, right? There's a lot of fact to what you do, right? You studied the body. It's not like you're just like, I think I have this sort of, I think medical astrology really needs a medical background, which you have, but it does feel like there has to be like a sense of like guiding intuition to just kind of know like, I think I'm going to go with this chart, or I feel like, right? Like, is that something you consciously lean into? And maybe this is like a separate question, like a deep dive, is like, do you have like practices, like magical practices or practices you have to build your own intuition?
I used to do a lot of magic when I was in my late teens. Like I was a pagan. I was a witch. I used to be in a coven. I used to be in a coven when I was younger with a lot of older people, and I was a sort of I was trained by this solitary witch when I was like probably from 16 until about 19 or something. So I did practice some of that intuition stuff. You're laughing at me.
Can I just sorry to interrupt you. I just want to like pause for a moment just to like point out, right? Like, so your childhood so far, we have like karate, like literal karate master, like you were teaching, right? Like under 18, like you were, right? And you were doing this like really intense form of like, meditative mandala yoga. And now you were like in a coven with like this like solitary witch. Like,
I forgot to mention that. It's a bit random, I know. It ended up, I'm wondering how I ended up. Ended up getting to meet this witch because I was working in a pizza shop. I was working in this pizza shop, and and the guy who was the manager, he was married to this witch, and she ended up like taking me on and like teaching me stuff, and we would sit together and like write our grimoires and like do all this stuff and do little rituals, and but then I ended up getting kind of further into the pagan thing, but then I kind of had enough. I felt like I didn't need to like I was talking to someone about this the other day. I think because I felt quite like when I was younger, I felt like a little bit disempowered. I think doing or leaning into magic gave me a sense of control, and I think as I felt more empowered as I grew up, I felt like I didn't need a spell or a talisman or whatever to like lean into necessarily. Don't get me wrong. Like sometimes I will still lean into something, but I don't really do any magic rituals anymore or anything like that. But I don't dress like that. Like I used to fit the whole picture. Like I would have the long, like purple sleeves and like the witchy kind of get up. Like it was a whole different thing. Yeah.
I'm so happy I stumbled upon that question. I did like, you were like Remember that show from the 80s, Doogie Howser, like the like teenage doctor? You're like the
Oh, I
occult
love
version of that.
that. I remember Doogie House. That was such a great show. I used to love that.
Did you graduate high school super early?
I graduated. I think I was I was 17 when I graduated high school. I think that's a pretty average age here. I think, ish.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I kind of enjoyed high school toward the end because yeah, I was challenged again. Like they did this whole educational psychologist person came and did these tests of me and ended up taking me out of school and putting me in this program. And I just like to get out of school because I was just a bit irritated by school.
Knew there was a program. There was a program.
They put me in a program anyway. But yeah, there's been a lot. I'm actually writing a book, but it's kind of under wraps. But it'll cover some of this.
Sorry, I'm like literally crying. I mean, not like crying, sad crying, but I'm just like laughing. So it's all so good. So should we? I feel like okay.
Medical astrology, maybe.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack, but I kind of described my session, right? So maybe the last two pieces as we wind down, right? Maybe could you describe like to people who sort of a general call, right? So people who've never worked with you, why would maybe a check-in with you like once a year, like, I mean, this sounds sales pitchy, it's not, but I'm just sort of explaining, you can explain it better than I can. Like, why would a check-in with you or someone similar, right? Well, specifically you, because you bring in all these things together. What's the use of it? There we go. And what does it look like?
I mean, as I use this all the time. It's okay. So it's a good idea to have a look at firstly at the natal chart to see what your constitution is like. You know, what is the vitality like? You know, what are the stumbling blocks? You know, how does the mind and body work together? You know, what kind of organs might be weak or prone to illness? What kind of, maybe your mind, you know, like in my chart, like with that Mercury ruling the 8th house in poor shape, like I'm taking lion's mane for my brain, like every day as a preventative measure. So if you know what you're working with, you can actually, to some degree, intervene and at least try and extend and minimize, you know, the likelihood of things popping up. Now, the other thing is doing a yearly check-in, that starts to look at the changing tides of your health. You know, is this year bringing up any threats to vitality? Is this year bringing up any potential illnesses that, you know, you could actually work to reduce? Like, is there going to be additional heat in the body this year? You know, that could disturb the mind, you know, in a psychological context. You know, it could bring anxiety, but it could also, you know, bring, you know, you might end up with spots or whatever. You get all these expressions of heat in different ways. So you can help someone to really get a look into the year ahead and to see what to do to actually mitigate some of the things that are coming up.
I'm listening to you and I'm plugging my computer in. I apologize.
Yes, of course. Yeah, and it's super wild. Like when I was looking at I think I shared this with you via voice message, but when I was looking at my solar return, and I noticed I had Mars in the first house, I immediately, because the first house does connect physiologically with Aries, you know, I thought I could end up with a head injury this year. And I actually did. End up having my head stuck back together again in January, like when I fell off a balcony, long story. But I've got a big scar down the front of my face and I noticed that I saw that, but I still did fall off the balcony. But I could see that there was a risk of that happening.
You're not selling it. You're not selling it.
Well, I'll give you something else, right? There's another one that's funny. So Mars is in the first house. So Mars can bring inflammation, right?
Okay.
But also it's in Gemini, which is hot and wet. And that can indicate like dampness and stuff and heat. And Gemini also describes the hands.
Yeah.
Now, because if we look at my natal chart, my 4th house ruler is Mars. And this can talk about the genetic predisposition, right?
Okay.
Now, Mars, when it comes to the first house in Gemini, I've actually found out I've got this genetic condition where I've actually got like this contracture of my hand. And the other day, I actually noticed a bunch of inflammation, and it just started. And it's just the perfect fit for this solar return. And so this is like, okay, if I didn't know that and I couldn't isolate the body part and know that it's probably connected to heat and dampness in Chinese medicine, I wouldn't know what to do to treat it. And it could worsen to be chronic over time.
So what it did was, by being able to have this solar return chart, and obviously the skill set knowledge that you have, maybe also too, like you were kind of on the lookout. You're like, okay, hands, inflammation. So when it happened, right, maybe it was something so subtle that people might just go, some people might just go, oh, whatever, like my hand feels a little weird. But I think a lot of us, myself at times included, just like go so fast through life that we aren't paying attention to our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of like was maybe a reminder of like, oh wait, that is something, I could see it in the chart. And again, coming like kind of similar to what you pointed out with me, you were able to not only treat, but also kind of to understand this is something that could be bigger, so that you're taking care of it now. You're being preventative.
And that's the key with it. You can help people prevent things. You can help people to get the relevant tests. You know, I might notice someone's got like, you know, for example, a sign of inflammation, or maybe they've got like a thyroid, a sign of something going on with the throat, or maybe the lower back looks affected, or the kidneys. So I might just say, okay, you know, maybe you should get this, like a blood test for this, or perhaps, you know, go and see this person, or if it's some kind of psychological thing too, because the good thing with Chinese medicine and medical astrology is that there's an integration of body and mind. And so it's not separate. It's not like if you've got additional heat in one year, you are likely to see the physiological and psychological signs of heat and inflammation. So you can help people. And I like to, like I brought in with you, like some of these sound frequencies, these healing frequencies as well, which are super powerful to help rebalance. Like if you've got Mars in excess one year, or the condition is hot and dry, you know, we could most definitely put in a Venus or a moon frequency into the treatment, which can actually really help to soothe and cool and add moisture to something that's really flaring out of control. So it's really about how do we strengthen the constitution, and that's always the primary focus. You know, we're not going to necessarily always oppose the conditions of the sixth house of the illness, unless it's really flaring, and then we probably will. But boost the constitution, you know, and that's why I'm taking this as an example, my favorite frankincense tincture, which I love. I mean, this is a herb of Saturn, and I've got Aquarius rising. It's cold and dry, and I've got this a little bit, because I've got Mars right on the MC, that's adding heat to my constitution. So, you know, it's like there is a huge amount of calculation and trying to really get a very clear idea of what it is for this person. How do we balance it? It is like maths in a way, like astrological maths.
Yeah. You know, what was reminded of when you were talking was, you know, I came to you, and I'm getting older, and like, I need to find a primary care. I'm like looking for a primary care physician. Doctors have always scared me, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons I've tried to be so in charge of my own health. I'm an advocate of doctors. I'm not saying that, but it's interesting. I have so many people in my life who are really unhealthy. Like you could just, it's obvious. Like they just eat like garbage, and like they've really unhealthy, and they'll go to their doctor, and their doctor will see them for like a few minutes and like take some vitals, and they're like, you're fine. And like, I have like one particular friend who's like, you know, this is happening for years. And then to the point where his doctor's like, yeah, you're diabetic, but here's some meds. You're overweight. Maybe I'm gonna suggest like surgery. Like just this like, and I think like doctors certainly are not advocates for people, right? Doctors, like, you go in, they do the thing, and they go whatever. And so I think what was so important, one of the takeaways from our consultation, was teaching me how to be an advocate, right? Because you were like saying, hey, like, you might want to get your thyroid test checked out, or maybe look at these things. So it's not like I'm doing this to not go to the doctor, but now it's like I have this set of skills, and when I go to the doctor, I can make sure, hey, could you kind of check this out? I mean, I'm like not telling my doctor what to do, but I can be an advocate for myself. So I can start to hear, like, if my doctor gives me a test result, I can start to go, okay, like, is that something I should be concerned with? And I think that that's something really beautiful. And I think that's what I was so inspired about. It was like, I like want to like give us your sessions to like everyone I know, because I think everyone needs to like learn how to be their own advocate, and not that we should like issue like medical technology. And I love that you absolutely don't. You were telling me to like, yeah, get blood work, get this, da da da. But yeah, that was my big takeaway.
That's really empowering, and I think that's the goal for me. I want to give people, like, I want to help people focus in on the key potential areas that need support, from a natal chart perspective, as well as, you know, transient or potential, you know, new acute or chronic condition. So instead of just having like everything possible in the universe, that when you go to the doctor, it's like, well, am I right? Like, you can say, well, you know, can you check this? Can you check that? How's this? Like, maybe I should get like, you know, a gynecological scan, or like if that's the area of the body that's affected, like, so people can kind of focus in on, because it's so much. Otherwise, the body is such an incredible, but it's so diverse. So it's like, well, helping people to focus in on particular parts of the body, and to tune into things like their temperature that year, or to tune into when they're feeling like, if they've got a Saturn perfection, I mean, they could tune into if they're feeling contracted in their body, and like paying extra attention to stretching and freeing up the body. So it's just, it is actually possible to really improve your health when you have the information at your disposal, and you know, it's translated in a way that helps you to feel strong and like, yeah, I can manage that. Yeah, I can probably change those dietary things. And it's all specific. Like, you were told to eat things, you know, like warm cooked, but, you know, to support with a bit of spices. But as other people, they might be so hot and dry that they could actually have a little bit more fresh for, you know, so it depends. Everything's specific there's not a one size fits all approach for anybody. It's incredibly specific. So it's definitely something that I love doing. I just love helping people, and I've seen some incredible results with people just by following simple diet, lifestyle, you know, sound frequencies. They've really just changed their state of mind, their body, and their energy levels. So yeah, I have it just gives me an extra way to work with people, especially remotely, because the chart will say pretty much what my pulse taking and the tongue diagnosis and everything else I do in person says.
Yeah. Okay, that's another overlap too. Yeah, I love you touched on the sound. I mean, the sound is a whole, I think that's a whole like other like podcast episode, but that was one of the things too, right? There was like, okay, eat this, maybe avoid this, try to do these exercises, right? Which also too, like very like simple, very easy things to integrate. And then it was like, and listen to the sound frequency, which I've been doing before bed, but I also like want to buy the tuning fork, right? So you tuning forks, like whole new world to me. I don't even know how do they work? So, I was listening to a recorded sound, because does a tuning fork like make that sound out loud? Is it like,
So their frequency is tuned to the planet. So, or there's different options. They're not all planetary. You can get like different ones connected to, say, like the Om frequency, which is going to be very grounding for someone. But in your case, we're using, and with a lot of medical astrology, we are using planetary forks or planetary frequencies. But yeah, it's just sound. And I mean, I think if you're toning that with your own voice, the resonance of the sound of the voice with that same tone, it reverberates through your entire system, like all the body, and with the intention as well of like, okay, I'm cooling my body down. It's very powerful. I was a little bit skeptical at the beginning when I got on my tuning forks and I was listening to these frequencies. I was a bit skeptical, and then when I was starting to work with clients around the world and giving them these frequencies, and they were having these huge responses and like getting a lot better, and you know, sometimes they were having really big responses, and I was like, whoa, okay, this is not just a little like game, you know, this is legitimate, like a legitimate way to help support the physiology and help people to recover from, you know, proper illnesses.
Okay. That's again, that's like a whole
Yeah.
episode that I want to deep dive in. So
Yeah.
last question is, what are we missing? Like, do we
Horary?
for,
Do we want to go into horary, medical horary? I mean, that's a whole kettle of fish too.
that's a cool, I wanted to, if that you were going to talk about I thought the really fun place to end was the decumpature chart of your cat.
It's great. Yeah. Well, sure. I can share it if you like.
Can you? Is that a good way to like wrap this up so we can actually talk a little bit about like see you in action? And
Yeah.
I'm gonna
I'm
see
happy
it.
to.
Let me make sure I can give you guests.
You actually hear her meowing a lot at the moment as well. She's been nonstop. She wants something. It's always the thing for Bella. How do we
see if you have the option to present? You should. Otherwise, I can, if you want to send it to
I
me.
think it should pop up now. Can you see that?
No. Did you? Is there a little present button on your Oh wait, here it is. Got it. I got it.
Excellent. Cool. All right. So this is Bella. Now Bella is an 18-year-old Persian chinchilla cat. And
what's a chinchilla cat? Sorry, I can't let that one go.
They look like the white fluffy cat food commercial cats.
Okay.
Yep. So Bella and I were living up in northern New South Wales, which is quite humid and hot.
Okay.
And Bella actually, out of the blue, had a seizure. And I was obviously pretty shocked because she'd never had anything like that before. So I cast a decumpature. Obviously not straight. Well, I did write the time down when she was having the seizure, as every doggy astrologer does. Like, quick, let me write my time down or take a screenshot of my phone. But so this is the chart that I cast, and Bella is described as Libra rising, which is perfect because actually this rising is about the position of her natal sun. So that already describes that this chart is likely to be radical. So this chart is likely to be one we can use that's going to speak strongly in this case and be accurate.
Okay.
And so Bella is described as Venus in Leo, which perfectly describes Bella, who is incredibly fabulous. And, you know, she's definitely got that princess kind of vibe. Now, the good news about the chart is Bella is in a good house. You know, she's above the horizon. She's direct in motion. And we can see, like, when we're looking at our malefic planets, we're not seeing any, like, she is going to slowly start to apply to the opposition of Saturn, which is, I guess, not ideal. But she's not closely applying to Mars. Like, they're both kind of a little bit out of range. So the thing that is interesting, though, is what we do here is we want to ascertain, is the pathogen stronger than the patient, right? So the patient is Bella. She's in pretty good form, actually. And the pathogen or the problem, the seizure, is described here by Pisces on the cusp of the 6th house, with Jupiter ruling it in Aries retrograde. Now, this is interesting. So I would say, well, Bella's actually like quite strong compared to that. Yeah. Like, this planet retrograde, it's in a bad house, like, you know. But the trouble is Bella is applying to try and that pathogen or that problem. So she's effectively, that they're mutually applying to each other. So that is indicative of this being like a legitimate problem that needs to be taken seriously. And it describes that the problem is connected potentially to swelling. Because for two reasons, because we've got Pisces on the 6th cusp, so that can describe swelling, but also, or things being kind of falling outside of boundaries, you know, in that way, maybe things the fluids not being in the right places, perhaps. And then Jupiter is in Aries, which governs the head. And so my thought is like, okay, does she have some kind of swelling in the head? Does she have some kind of fluid imbalance? There's definitely heat involved here because Jupiter is in a hot and dry choleric sign. So we're living in a hot, wet place, right? So I'm sort of saying, okay, it could be a tumor in the brain that's actually leading to these seizures, because Jupiter can be connected to, malignant or benign tumors because of its connection to things that grow.
Yeah.
And yada, yada, yada. So I went down this trajectory and I was like, okay, this doesn't look great, but Bella's looking like she's in pretty good condition. And also the moon, which is describing, and describing Bella too, is exalted. And it's also in an angular house. So I think that's good. But the thing is, it's heading up towards this little dicey section here, this North Node Uranus conjunction. And what I noticed, fast forwarding a little bit, when I looked at the critical day charts, which is kind of like seeing when there's likely to be a flare up, she actually did have a flare up a few months or a couple of months later. And it was when the moon came back to the conjunction with Uranus, or it was translating between, the North Node. It was moving toward between the North Node and Uranus. And so this brings in Uranus describing seizures, because it's kind of about that electrical activity, like the moon's moving toward that. And so we sort of saw the flare up with that. And the thing I've noticed that I think is really great, when we're looking at the treatment, what do we do for Bella? We look at the 10th house. And we look at the moon, so that we need to do moony things to help Bella. So it was about her diet. It was about adding more moistening foods, like to the point of she actually even was getting a little bit of avocado. Like she was getting yin nourishing, so kidney yin nourishing herbs, because the 10th house ruler is actually in the 7th, which connects to the kidneys when we're looking at the Chinese medicine connection. So we were nourishing kidney yin. And also some TLC, it was about her home life. She was feeling like too hot. I think the pathogen is hot here. So we actually moved back to Melbourne, where it's colder and drier, and she hasn't had a seizure since. So those things all mixed together with some TLC, because it's the moon, I think was exactly what she needed.
That is an incredible description of what you do, but also really describes your devotion as a pet parent, custodian, if you will. Like the fact that you moved countries and I just giving your cat like this really wonderful diet. So did you go to when that happened, you're looking at this and you had your own treatment. Did you go to the vet? Did you get any other like feedback?
Yeah, and this chart informed me to actually pretty much get her out of that vet, to be honest. I was concerned that the vet could actually lead to her illness or chronic illness or even death. I know that sounds very dramatic, but when we look at the vet, we're looking at that 7th house cusp. Okay, so the vet is described by Mars in Taurus in poor shape, like in the malefic terms of Taurus at the end degrees. Mars is debilitated in Taurus. And so I thought to myself, man, this vet doesn't know what the hell they're doing. And they didn't know what they were doing. They just kept giving her more and more fluids. And I just said to them, how long has she been on fluids? And I said, nah, we've got to get this up. Yes, fluids are part of the treatment in a sense, because the moon rules the 10th house. But the moon is in a cold and dry sign, so we don't want to give too many fluids. And plus the illness itself is Pisces with Jupiter in there. I was a bit concerned. Plus we can't ignore Neptune. There's too much fluids could actually be bad for Bella. So I just said, okay, I think you've given her enough. I'm taking her home. And so, I gave that. The good thing about these charts is you can give people information to help them respond. Like I've done other decumbitus for people who've had like appendicitis or like, heart complications. Just obviously they have medical support at the time, but sometimes they can stuff around, and I can cast the chart and be like, no, you need to get to that emergency room ASAP. Like this is a real problem, because it's just glaring in the chart. So the chart is amazing when it comes to actually the symbolism, without a doubt, reliably describes the condition at hand. And there's heaps more in this chart, but that's just a nutshell.
Astro nerd question. why does how do you get Mars as in Taurus is describing the vet?
Oh, because the seventh house cusp here,
Okay.
and the planet ruling it,
Okay.
is the descriptor of the physician. So because
Oh,
Mars
okay.
is ruling Aries, that vet, and it did describe the vet, right? It was super interesting. When I went there, they were gung ho, and you know what they all they wanted is money, right? They were like Mars and Taurus, they're like dollar bills, right? Give me that money. They asked me for the money before they even told me what was wrong with her. And I was like, this is all wrong. Like, they were being very they were just almost being kind of brutal. She came out with a number of like kind of little hematomas where they tried to put the fluids into her and they stuffed it up. Like, so you could just see that Mars wasn't in good operation. Like, you would never want to see someone getting surgery or in a medical procedure with a Mars instability like that. That is a red flag.
Thank you. Which I just, it's worth maybe pointing out, and I'll we can take this down in a moment. I can wrap up, but
Yeah.
I think, again, to gush, I have such respect for what you do, because you do also have like the sort of the medical background. Like, you have the years of training in Chinese medicine and herbalism, and you have all of that on top of the medical astrology. I don't suggest that people like just, I don't know, like, as astrologers just casually start like diagnosing themselves with a little bit of it feels like that could be a little dangerous.
It's so dangerous. You really need to know what you're going to do about it. Like, there's no point just saying, oh, well, it looks like this is affected or this organ's got a problem. You need to be able to say, well, that is possible. Let's get some tests. Or that is possible. How does this feel? In the morning, do you feel like this? Then let's try this herb or this formulation or acupuncture or diet, nutrition. So there's lots of things people can do, but it's actually a bit cruel to just say to someone, all right, well, this is broken. Your consultation's done. See you later. No kind of therapy. Like, really, medical astrologers need to have a medicine that they're practicing. And, like, traditionally speaking, like doctors like Culpeper or, Gadbury and all, some of these old physicians, like they were medical practitioners, but they were also astrologers. And I think that's so forgotten these days. Like, practitioners back then in like the 14s, 15s, 1600s, they would take the urine sample.
This chart down.
Of course, please. Sorry. They would take that urine sample, and then they would cast the chart. Like, they would cast the decumbiture, and then that chart would inform them about the prognosis and the affected organs and some idea of how to kind of proceed, and then they would use critical days and other things to see, is this condition likely to worsen? I mean, it's great to be able to actually apply the movement of the moon to these charts, because you can say, all right, you're entering into a crisis period, next time the moon comes up to an angle or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot to it, but it helps to give people a bit more insight and empowerment that they can actually respond. If the crisis period is really like Marsy, they need to get those cooling herbs into them to sort of bring the heat down in time. Otherwise, the crisis is going to be worse, So it's sort of like, just thinking ahead, trying to get ahead of the illness with the knowledge.
Something you said was interesting, is that about the moon. So you had that chart, and you knew that the chart, the moon was applying to the Uranus North Node, and you're like, oh, that looks tricky. And you watched when the moon returned to that point in the sky, and there was indeed a flare up.
Yeah, and this happens all the time. All the time. Yeah, all the time. People can see this often natally as well. So with any hard aspect or conjunction by the moon to the moon, or also to some of the malefics, you might notice that those are particularly challenging times. But in this case, because the moon applying to Uranus really was that snapshot of a seizure.
Yeah.
We really had to watch that. That would be a very delicate time. And I think also, you would pay attention at the other critical moments, like the opposition to that and the square.
Yeah.
So they're going to be those that axis is going to be like the tuned up, generally more dangerous time. Yeah. So
Yeah, this is a really good. This is my transition. Okay, so you have all this knowledge. We're wrapping this up. Do you teach? I know you teach. I know you give workshops in person, but do you do teaching online? Like, if people want to work with you, obviously they can book a consultation. Your website, you have many offerings. Specifically, the ones we're talking about today is the which it took me a minute to your website. This is the medical astrology. Like, if people are interested in what we're learning today, I guess I'm going to jump questions. What consultation would they book on your website?
yeah, I know there's a few. It can get a little complex. So yeah, they can either they book the medical astrology session.
Okay.
If they want to go into a deep dive of, into their medical, their whole medical stuff, all the medical stuff. It's a deep dive into their history and into the year that we're in now. So it's a numerous different charts are prepared ahead of time, and then we go through it all. If they've got a question about a medical condition that is specifics, they can actually book a medical horary, and that is going to be one chart specifically based on answering the question. So it could be something like, is this condition serious, or like, what's a good treatment for this, or whatever. So you can ask a very specific question, and then the chart reveals the answer. But that's going to be less complex. I'm still going to check your natal chart and maybe look at some of other timing techniques. But yeah, so they could either book a medical horary if they've got a specific, or if they want to go deep into their like constitutional factors and what's happening at the moment, then they book medical astrology. And I do teach. I'm doing a course actually, but it's going to be up here where I live. I do like an introduction to traditional astrology course.
Okay.
And I will do another one online. So if anyone's interested, they can send me. I've got like a little bit of a list of people who want to do the next one. So I'm just kind of gathering it all. And if anyone's interested, if anyone might want to learn a bit more about the key features of traditional astrology in terms of chart reading, like if they want to read their own chart, or they've had a session and they've downloaded some of what it means, but it just looks like gibberish. I do run courses on helping people to actually translate that into something that makes sense, so they can read their chart and understand a bit more about what that means.
Yeah. Okay. Do you ever teach the horary stuff?
I am like, I want to lean toward that because it's quite specific. I think that if anyone wants to learn, I would be happy to do some sessions on that. I mean, it's pretty. It sounds fundamental. Like there's some fundamentals that you need to know.
Yeah.
I think as well, if it's for other astrologers who are working with their own medical conditions, I think that could be a good thing to know how to interpret. Because there's multi-layers. Like you really need to be looking at Time Lords, and you need to be looking at those planets as specific triggers, and using transits and using solars and using decumbiture. So there's multiple layers. So I think it does take a little bit of extra training to really know what do you focus in on, because if you're dealing with 6 charts and all these planets, you really need to be able to go, okay, that chart, these are my planetary Time Lords that are going to be really packing the punches, and these are the most potentially damaging or risky aspects, or so sort of I'd like to help people to kind of focus in on what to do in what order.
Oh, that's amazing. I feel like even as just an astrologer.
Sorry, hon. I was just going to say it probably would help if they had a bit of astrology background. I do have I have some astrology students that I see one-on-one. So I do the courses in groups, but I actually have some students one-on-one just for traditional astrology. But for those students, some of them are like, oh, will you teach me medical? And I'm like, we really have a lot of other things to do first. Medicals is there's a lot of techniques that come together under that. So yeah.
No, totally. I was going to say, is even as a practicing astrologer who brings in a lot of different charts, I would still feel like I'd love to have just a basic understanding so I could better like go, maybe there's something here, and then now go see Danielle. Because I don't know, with the health stuff, it's so tricky. Like when people come to me, I don't, it's not like, that's not my wheelhouse, but I would love to be able to just like know enough that I could say, okay, maybe there's something here. Go consult a professional.
There's definitely a way that we could teach you that, just keeping it very basic, like, 10 key things to look at, luminaries, houses, 6th house, 8th house, 12th house, first house, treatment in the 10th house, basic features. And then, okay, what is the temperament? What are the humors? Like, is this person deficient or excess? And then what might be some interventions that you could suggest. So I think it would be definitely possible to teach that. Yeah.
But I'm planting seeds here is what I'm doing.
Amazing. No, thank you. You asked great questions.
Thank you. This has been truly wonderful. Danielle Ashley, you have one of my favorite names. You are Queen of Hearts Astrology, and people can find you at queenofheartsastrology.com. You're on Instagram. Where can the people find you?
I'm doing some YouTube videos, so I'm starting to share a bit more about medical astrology and horror and things. And I do the quick snippets on Instagram, and then I've been doing longer form videos on YouTube at just a Queen of Hearts Astrology as well. So yeah, and I'm on Facebook, but I just that's pretty much a replica of Instagram. So yeah, they're not going to get new things there. But if they go to YouTube, then they'll get some new material. And they're welcome to send me an email if anyone's got questions and they might want to work with me in a specific way, or they can't kind of decode all of the different consultations. They can just email me at hello@queenofheartsastrology.com, and I'm happy to like answer questions or anything like that.
And I can speak to experience. You get back very quickly. And again, I'm so happy we had our chat on IG, and then I had a consultation. And so, yeah, I'm so excited to get to like debrief and learn from you here. And I suppose I should give myself my outro now, right? I'm Vivi Henriette of Art of the ZODIAC. I do these talks, conversations with astrology. I'm just like the gamut, right? Artists, astrologers, magicians, magically centered people. This is really exciting. Follow me, Art of the ZODIAC, and all the places for more of these talks. And this has been my absolute pleasure. And again, I'm pointing out that I'm about to go to bed. You're moving on with your day. You're in the future. I love time. Have a beautiful day, Danielle.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Have a beautiful rest.
Bye.
Bye.
There are no parents, no other adults, no one to interfere with the fun.